Look at these two charts. One is Trump's and the other is from a historic president. Which one do you think belongs to Trump? Think like an investor and say, in which one you would invest your money, the red one or the blue one. Numbers don't lie, but they can deceive you if you don't look at the context. Today, you will see all presidents since 1920 in a showdown against Donald Trump to find out who had the best economy. And the answer is not who you think. But let's put the criteria on the table. To be fair, we can't use only the stock market, nor only unemployment. You will see several data points, such as the misery index, which is inflation plus unemployment, GDP, and much more. The pandemic was the big problem in Donald Trump's economy. It was a period that shook the economy of the United States and the world. Before any comparison, let's take a look at this abyss in the S&P 500 chart. The growth line was relatively stable, but in the second quarter of 2020, it went through the largest instantaneous contraction ever recorded in history, a plunge of minus 30%. So based on this absurd scenario, here is the question. We cannot blame Trump entirely for the 2020 crash, the COVID, just like we don't blame Hoover for 1929 or Bush for 2008. Let's put them on the table to see their differences. In 1929, during the Great Depression, the graph is an L shape. That is, it falls drastically and stays on the ground. Here at the apex, the peak of September 1929, the value of the main industries of the United States, meaning how much the companies were worth and how much money investors had, was between 380 points in this index, and in 1932, it dropped to 41 points. It is a fall of almost 90%. To make it easier to understand, it's as if a luxury apartment worth $380,000 at the time fell to $41,000. Its value evaporated. And the country felt the symptoms for 25 years, still below crisis levels, recovering only in 1954. With Bush, what unfolded was a U-shaped graph. It falls and takes time to return to its axis. Starting his second term in 2005, with its peak in October 2007 at almost 14,000 points in this index and plunging to 8,000. And the consequences of this drop only began to improve after 2011. With Trump in 2020, the graph is a V shape, falling abruptly and rising quickly. This period lasted 8 months, but only visibly surpassed 11 months later. Well, the nature of these crashes is clearly different. Two are financial crises, while the other was something external, a virus. 1929 was structural failure, and 2020 was an induced coma. In the first two crises, presidents hesitated, while with Trump, the money faucet was opened, printing trillions of dollars, giving checks to people. You might say this miracle wasn't free, the market was saved, but the bill arrived later with the debts? We'll see that in the chapter Debt and Inflation. During Trump's first-term campaigns, he made a very bold promise that he would reach the annual economic growth of the golden era of the 1950s and 60s, growth between 4 and 6% per year. From the beginning and through the middle of his term, the line is indeed beautiful. The 2017 tax cut injected adrenaline into the market, allowing people to take more risks and invest better. The economy accelerated. In the middle to the end of this period, there was the decline due to the coronavirus. But since we already talked about that crash, we will focus only on growth and forget this temporarily. His growth was from 2.5 to 3% per year, which is a good economy for modern standards. Since his goal was the Golden Era benchmark, his opponents in this round would be Eisenhower and Lyndon B. Johnson. However, to be statistically honest, we will go through all the most relevant modern presidents and show this in growth percentage to make it easier to understand. At the top, Roosevelt. During the war, using it as a growth tool was a genius move. Below, the boom of the 60s, Kennedy and Johnson, with 5.3%. But notice that even Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton are far ahead. Trump is here, in the middle of the table, with around 2.5% growth. He beats the Bushes and Obama, who are at 2.3% or lower, but loses to the big names of the 20th century. However, when placing Trump's economy side by side with theirs using raw numbers, well, he disappears, even if at first it doesn't seem so. Look, with Trump, he started with a GDP of 19,000 in billions, ending with an absurd 22,000 in billions. Incredible, right? Well, let's look into this in depth. Strangely, Eisenhower, who had a GDP in billions of 390 and ended with 540, and Lyndon Johnson, with 650 ending with 1,030, had more growth than Trump. How? Well, that's the illusion of big numbers. If you have $10 and earn $10, you doubled your wealth. It is as if Eisenhower and Johnson had a store and added a second floor to it, while Trump added a small extension to it. It is easier to grow faster when you are creating the world from scratch than when things already exist. Keep that in mind. Well, in the end, Trump was looking at the big numbers and growth of the 50s and 60s, but reached the solid numbers of 2010. But let's be honest, you don't pay your home bills with GDP. A growing country is beautiful, but it's pointless if you're not putting money inside your house. This is where we enter Trump's most powerful weapon. He repeatedly said he created the greatest job market in human history. But did he create it or surf on the wave of another president? Let's look at the unemployment lines. The greatest economy in the history of our country, Trump said that repeatedly during his administration. But let's look more closely. Well, this is the unemployment chart from 2010 to 2019, again excluding the pandemic crash to keep things fair. Looking at it this way, was Trump's unemployment rate his own merit or Obama's inheritance? As we can see, the line has been falling from 2010 to 2019. If in GDP the victory or defeat is debatable, in unemployment, the argument is extremely strong in favor of Trump. Before the pandemic, in September 2019, unemployment hit 3.5%. That's what economists call full employment, meaning whoever wanted to work, worked. It was the lowest rate in 50 years. Point for Trump, right? Well, it depends who you ask. But let's be fair and apply this to our historical test. Trump says he was the best in history, so to win this battle, we will compare him again with modern presidents, from lowest to highest. With Coolidge, the lowest average was a 1.8 unemployment rate, which is practically like unemployment being non-existent. What is that? With Eisenhower, an incredible 2.5%, 1 percentage point below Trump due to his rise during and after the war. Trump surpassed Bill Clinton, who was at the peak of the internet bubble, surpassed Reagan, the Bushes, and Obama. We won't mention Hoover, who was a disaster in the Great Depression for obvious reasons. And Ford and Carter were in stagflation, a bad economy that doesn't compete on this graph. But remember Trump's move to print money and give it to the population during the crisis? Well, let's take a look at debt and inflation. Trump said Obama's public debt was a ticking time bomb. And even in debates with Hillary Clinton, he repeatedly said $20 trillion as a breaking point. He promised to eliminate this national debt in just 8 years. Obama entered with a $10 trillion debt and ended his terms with $19 trillion, meaning he added $9 trillion. Indeed, extremely high spending in 8 years in office. In Trump's case, in 4 years, he increased public debt from $19 trillion to $27 trillion, an increase of almost $8 trillion, almost the same as Obama in half the time. Critics love to use this as an argument, but to be fair, we must separate emergency spending, something inevitable during the pandemic, from economic policy, which is his choice. So, since any president would go into debt at that moment, let's remove the pandemic part from the equation. The real problem is here, in 2017, 18, and 19. The basic rule of economics is, in crisis, you spend. In prosperity, you save. Look at Bill Clinton. In the 90s, with the economy booming, he paid down the debt and generated a surplus. That's why his increase was only a little over $1 trillion in 8 years. Trump did the opposite. With the economy at its peak, Trump aggressively cut taxes, creating a hole in public accounts before the virus even arrived. He wanted to give the sensation of freedom so that the economy would spin. That is, he used a credit card when he already had cash in his pocket. But if he printed so much money, where was the immediate inflation? Well, at that moment, during the pandemic, nobody felt the effect. People had money in their accounts, but nowhere to spend it. Nobody traveled, went to restaurants, or went to supermarkets. In historic economics, inflation only happens when there is a lot of money chasing products, the law of supply and demand. In 2020, we had lots of money but weren't spending it. It stayed inside people's homes and didn't change hands. It was like a dam holding an entire ocean, with the ocean being the huge amount of money and the dam being the lockdown. As soon as life returned to normal and the dam broke, well, this M2 money supply chart shows the crime and the crime scene. Normally, money printing rises slowly and steadily, like this. But never in the history of humanity had there been such fast printing in such a short period. With Trump and the Fed, the money entered the system, but prices only exploded when Biden was already sitting in the chair. That is, Trump left inflation low during his term, but left a ticking time bomb, a ketchup bottle that hasn't fallen yet but will, for whoever entered the White House next. Well, putting all the data together, we can divide it like this: GDP, solid, B+; employment, historic, A+; market, stocks, excellent, A; debt, fiscal, bad, D-. So, returning to the video's question, Trump versus everyone, who had the best economy? The answer is, it depends. If you are a worker looking for a job, the pre-pandemic era under Trump was statistically one of the best moments in history to live in America. If you are an investor, the V-shaped recovery and tax cuts made your money grow like in few other times in history. But if you look at the country's long-term health, the grade is red. Growth was financed by debt, and stability was artificially maintained. So, leave in the comments what you thought of the video and give ideas for future analyses that we can make, being 100% impartial.